Sir, stand up right now. You are trespassing.
I'm not asking again. I paid for my coffee. I'm reviewing blueprints in a building I'm legally allowed to be in.
I don't care what you think you're doing. The manager wants you gone. Move.
Making a serious mistake, officer.
Check your facts before...
The Iron Press Coffee Company was the crown jewel of the newly revitalized Depot District. It was the sort of establishment that prided itself on $15 pour-overs and an industrial chic aesthetic that screamed exclusionary without saying a word. Exposed ductwork, reclaimed barnwood, and the smell of roasting beans that cost more per pound than most people's weekly grocery budget. It was 9:00 a.m., and the morning sun was cutting sharp angles through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The shop was humming with the low murmur of business deals and the clicking of laptop keyboards. In the back corner near the vintage espresso machine display sat Marcus Thorne. Marcus was 58 years old, a black man with graying temples and hands that looked like they had known a lifetime of hard labor. He was wearing a faded Carhartt jacket, dusty work boots that left a faint outline of drywall dust on the polished concrete floor, and a plain navy baseball cap. To the casual observer, he looked like a contractor on a lunch break, or perhaps a laborer waiting for a ride. He had a singular cup of black coffee in front of him which had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Spread out on the table weren't the sleek MacBooks or tablets that littered the other tables, but a large, rolled-out set of architectural blueprints and a weathered notebook. Marcus Thorne sat with the stillness of a man who didn't need to rush. He wasn't scrolling through a phone or looking around nervously. He was studying the structural schematics of the HVAC system on the paper before him, occasionally making a note with a carpenter's pencil. He possessed a quiet gravity, a dignity that doesn't scream for attention. But in the Depot District, where image was currency, his presence was disrupting the carefully curated atmosphere. He didn't look like the tech entrepreneurs or the junior partners from the law firm across the street. He looked to the untrained and prejudiced eye like a stain on a pristine tablecloth. And for the young officer patrolling the beat outside and the ambitious manager watching from behind the counter, Marcus Thorne was about to become a target. Brett Higgins watched the man in the corner with growing irritation. Brett was 26 years old, the general manager of the Iron Press, and he treated the coffee shop less like a business and more like his personal living room. He had been hired to cultivate a specific vibe, a word he used in nearly every staff meeting. Brett wore skinny ties and had a haircut that cost $80, and he firmly believed that the clientele was part of the decor. If the customers didn't look the part, they devalued the brand. That was Brett's philosophy. He had been watching Marcus for 40 minutes. In Brett's mind, the narrative was already written. This man wasn't a patron. He was a problem. Sure, he had bought a coffee almost an hour ago, but he was nursing it. He was taking up a 4-top table during the tail end of the rush. And then there were the boots. Brett stared at the dusty work boots with disdain. They were dirty. They were bringing grit into his shop. The blueprints didn't register to Brett as professional documents. They looked like props. Maybe the guy was homeless, pretending to work to stay out of the cold. Maybe he was casing the place. Brett wiped down the counter, snapping the towel aggressively. He had tried to catch the man's eye to give him the time to move on glare. But Marcus Thorne was absorbed in his work, completely oblivious to the silent daggers being thrown his way. Brett checked the clock. 9:15 a.m. This had gone on long enough. It wasn't just about the table. It was about the comfort of the real customers. Brett convinced himself that the woman at the adjacent table, a marketing executive typing furiously, looked uneasy. She hadn't looked up once, but Brett projected his own bias onto her. He pulled his smartphone from his apron pocket. He didn't dial the emergency line. He dialed the non-emergency dispatch, a number he had saved specifically for quality-of-life issues. When the dispatcher answered, Brett's voice took on a tone of performative concern. "Yeah, this is Brett over at the Iron Press on 5th. I need an officer sent over. I've got a guy here who's refusing to leave. He's been loitering for an hour. He's dirty, and he's making the female customers really uncomfortable. He's looking at them aggressively. It was a lie, a fabrication born of prejudice. Marcus hadn't looked at a soul, but Brett knew the buzzwords that triggered a police response. Aggressive, refusing to leave, making women uncomfortable. Is he armed? The dispatcher asked. I don't know. Brett lied, lowering his voice to a whisper. He's got these big, heavy clothes on. He could be. I just need him out before he scares off my business. We have a unit around the corner, the dispatcher said. Officer Vance is inbound. Brett hung up a smug smile, touching his lips. He looked over at Marcus, who was calmly turning a page of the blueprints, unaware that the machinery of the state was barreling toward him to crush him. Officer Kyle Vance was sitting in his patrol cruiser parked illegally in a loading zone 2 blocks away, scrolling through social media when the call came across his computer terminal. Subject refusing to leave, harassing customers. Possible 1076 unwanted person. Vance straightened up, adjusting his tactical vest. This was what he was looking for. Not a cat in a tree, not a noise complaint, but a real confrontation. He put the cruiser in drive and peeled out, not running lights and sirens, but driving with an aggressive urgency that made pedestrians step back from the curb. He was the authority here. He was the hammer, and he was going looking for a nail. He pulled up to the curb in front of the iron press, the tires crunching slightly against the concrete. He didn't park in a spot. He left the cruiser idling in the fire lane lights, flashing silently to announce his presence. Here comes the law, he thought. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror, shaved head, jaw set tight, and stepped out into the cool autumn air. Vance walked into the coffee shop with his hand resting on his belt near his taser. The bell above the door chimed and heads turned. Brett Higgins, the manager, immediately came out from behind the counter, wiping his hands and putting on a face of relief. He pointed a finger directly at the back corner. Over there, officer, Brett said, loud enough for half the shop to hear. The guy in the hat. I asked him to leave 20 minutes ago and he just stared at me. He's scaring people. Vance didn't ask for details. He didn't interview the scared customers. He didn't ask what the man had actually done. He took the manager's word as gospel because it fit the profile in his head. Vagrant, trouble, disrespectful. Vance locked his eyes on Marcus Thorne. Marcus was still looking down at his papers, his large hand tracing a line on the blue sheet. To Vance, this wasn't concentration. It was insolence. The man hadn't even looked up to acknowledge the police officer. It was a challenge. Vance marched through the maze of tables, his heavy boots clomping loudly on the wood floor. He bypassed a table of college students, brushed past a businessman on a call, and stopped directly in front of Marcus's table. He stood there for a full 5 seconds, waiting for the man to cower. Marcus didn't flinch. He simply finished writing a measurement, capped his pencil, and slowly looked up. His eyes were calm, dark, and utterly unimpressed. "Can I help you, son?" Marcus asked. His voice was deep, a rumble like a distant engine. The word son hit Vance like a slap. He wasn't a son. He was an officer of the law. His face flushed red. "You need to pack your things, now," Vance barked, his voice cracking slightly before finding its authoritarian register. "You're trespassing." The coffee shop went silent. The typing stopped. The low hum of conversation evaporated. Every eye in the room pivoted to the corner table. Marcus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his stomach. He didn't reach for his pockets. He knew better than to make sudden movements around a jumpy rookie. "Trespassing," Marcus repeated, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "I believe you're mistaken, officer. I'm a paying customer. I bought this coffee." "Manager says you've been here too long and you're bothering people," Vance snapped, stepping closer, invading Marcus's personal space. "That means your business is done. When the owner says go, you go. That's the law." "I haven't bothered anyone," Marcus said, looking past Vance to Brett, who was standing behind the counter with his arms crossed, smirking. "And I have business here. Important business with the structure." "I don't care about your business," Vance interrupted, his voice rising. "I don't care if you're the Pope. You are loitering on private property. Now I'm going to ask you one time to stand up and walk out that door, or I'm going to drag you out." "You should really check your tone," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming harder. "And you should really verify the situation before you start issuing orders. I'm reviewing the HVAC schematics for the renovation of the 3rd floor. I'm not going anywhere until I'm finished." "Renovation?" Vance laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "Look at you. You're covered in drywall dust. You think I'm stupid? You're not an architect. You're a squatter. Let's go." Vance reached for his radio, signaling that this was escalating. "Dispatch, show me with one uncooperative male at the iron press. Step it up." The customers were shifting uncomfortably now. A young man at the next table, a guy in a hoodie with a laptop, spoke up timidly. "Officer, he really hasn't done anything. He's just been sitting there." Vance spun around, pointing a finger at the witness. "Mind your business or you'll be joining him for obstruction. Back off." He turned back to Marcus. "Last chance. ID. Now." "I don't need to show you ID to drink coffee," Marcus said steadily. "But if you want to know who I am, you can call your watch commander. Ask for Sergeant Miller. Tell him Marcus Thorne is at the depot building." "I'm not calling anyone," Vance spat. "You're refusing a lawful order." "It's not a lawful order if it's based on a lie," Marcus replied. "You are making a mistake, officer. A very expensive mistake." Vance's patience snapped. The defiance, the calmness, the audacity of this man to tell him how to do his job, it was too much for his ego to handle. He saw a man who needed to be taught a lesson in respect. "Stand up! You're under arrest!" Vance shouted, lunging forward. He didn't give Marcus time to comply. He grabbed Marcus's left arm, yanking him upward. Marcus was a big man, heavy and solid, and he didn't rise easily. Vance interpreted the weight as resistance. "Stop resisting!" Vance screamed for the benefit of the cameras he knew were recording. "I am not resisting," Marcus said, his voice straining as his arm was twisted behind his back. "I am standing up. Let go of my arm, son." "Don't call me son." Vance jammed his knee into the back of Marcus's leg, forcing him off balance and slamming him chest first onto the table. The coffee cup tipped over, spilling cold black liquid across the blueprints. The schematics soaked up the stain instantly. That, Marcus grunted, his face pressed against his own paperwork, was foolish. Vance pulled Marcus's other arm back, wrenching the shoulders to a painful angle. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt and ratcheted them on click, 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 tight. Too tight. He squeezed the metal until it bit into the skin of Marcus's wrists. "You're done," Vance panted, adrenaline flooding his system. "Trespassing, resisting arrest, disorderly conduct." He hauled Marcus up from the table. Marcus stood tall despite the hands cuffed behind him. He shook his head slowly, looking at the ruined blueprints, then at the young officer. "Officer," Marcus said, and this time there was no anger in his voice, only a cold, terrifying pity. "You have just destroyed your life. I tried to tell you." "Shut up," Vance said, shoving him toward the door. "Walk." The walk of shame was agonizing. Vance paraded Marcus past the tables of stunned customers. Phones were up everywhere. The little red recording lights were blinking like a constellation of eyes. Brett Higgins watched from the counter, but his smirk was faltering. Something about the way Marcus held his head up, something about the way the other customers were murmuring shame and unbelievable, made the manager's stomach turn. Vance pushed Marcus out the door and into the bright morning sun. He shoved him against the side of the cruiser, patting him down, roughly checking pockets. He found a wallet, a heavy set of keys, and a laser measuring tool. He tossed them onto the hood of the car with a clatter. "Get in," Vance ordered, opening the back door and pushing Marcus's head down to force him into the cramped plastic seat of the cage. Marcus sat awkwardly, his large frame squeezed into the small space, his shoulders burning from the position of his arms. He looked through the wire mesh at the young officer getting into the driver's seat. "I want you to remember this moment," Marcus said through the glass. "Remember how confident you felt." Vance ignored him, revving the engine and pulling away from the curb, leaving the confused and angry patrons of the iron press staring at the empty street. The ride to the precinct was a 12-minute lecture. Vance, feeling the high of the arrest, couldn't keep his mouth shut. He glanced at Marcus in the rearview mirror, eyes filled with disdain. "See, that's the problem with people like you," Vance said, turning a corner sharply. "You think you own the place. You think because you've got a little attitude you can ignore the rules. We're cleaning up this district. The depot isn't a shelter, it's a business district." Marcus remained silent, staring out the window at the passing city. He watched the neighborhoods change from the gentrified brick of the depot to the municipal gray of the precinct. "You got nothing to say now, huh?" Vance goaded. "Real tough guy back at the shop. Now you're just another booking number." "I am saving my breath," Marcus said softly. "You're going to need yours to explain this." Vance scoffed. "I don't have to explain anything. Manager called you trespassed, you resisted. Open and shut." They pulled into the sally port of the Metro precinct. The heavy metal gate rattled shut behind them. Vance got out, opened the back door, and hauled Marcus out. He gripped Marcus's bicep tight, marching him through the secure doors and into the intake area. The intake room was busy. Officers were processing a couple of shoplifters and a drunk driver. The smell of bleach and stale coffee hung in the air. Vance walked Marcus up to the main desk where the booking sergeant sat. Sergeant Jenkins was an old-timer, 30 years on the force. He had seen everything. He looked up over his reading glasses as Vance approached with his prize. Jenkins's eyes moved from Vance's proud face to the man in cuffs. Jenkins paused. He squinted. "What do we have here, Vance?" Jenkins asked, his voice slow. "Trespassing, resisting, disorderly," Vance rattled off. "Refused to leave a business in the depot. Got hostile." Jenkins looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Jenkins. A flicker of recognition passed through the sergeant's eyes, but he couldn't quite place the face. The baseball cap cast a shadow, and the work clothes threw him off. "Name?" Jenkins asked Marcus. "Marcus Thorne," Marcus said clearly. The room seemed to drop a few degrees in temperature. A detective at a nearby desk stopped typing. He turned his chair around. "Thorne?" the detective asked. "As in Thorne Development?" Vance rolled his eyes. "He's a squatter detective. Claims he was looking at blueprints." "I have my wallet in my back pocket," Marcus said to Jenkins. "If you would be so kind as to check my identification, and then I'd like you to call Sergeant Miller. He knows me." Jenkins stood up slowly. He walked around the desk. He pulled the wallet from Marcus's pocket, which Vance had confiscated earlier, and shoved in there. He opened it. He looked at the ID. Then he looked at a business card tucked behind it. Jenkins looked up at Vance. The look wasn't one of pride. It was the look a parent gives a child who has just set the kitchen on fire. "Vance," Jenkins whispered, "take the cuffs off." "What Sarge, he resisted. I have to process him." "Take the damn cuffs off now," Jenkins roared, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. The shout summoned the watch commander. Sergeant Miller burst out of his office, a half-eaten sandwich in one hand. "What the hell is going on out here?" Miller stopped dead. He saw Kyle Vance fumbling with the keys to the handcuffs. He saw the man standing there rubbing his wrists, the red indentations deep and angry against his skin. "Marcus?" Miller asked, dropping his sandwich onto a desk. "Marcus Thorne?" "Hello, Jim?" Marcus said, his voice calm but icy. "It's been a while." Miller looked at Vance, then back at Marcus. Why is Mr. Thorne in handcuffs? He was trespassing at the iron press, Vance stammered, sensing the ground crumbling beneath his feet but unable to stop digging. He wouldn't leave when the manager asked. Miller closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose. He took a deep breath. Vance, do you know who owns the building that houses the iron press? Some investment group, I guess, Vance said. No, Miller said, opening his eyes. Mr. Thorne owns the building. In fact, Mr. Thorne owns that entire city block. He built the depot district. He is the landlord. Vance felt the blood drain from his face. His knees actually wobbled. He owns the shop. I own the structure, Marcus corrected, his voice cutting through the silence. I lease the space to the iron press. I was there performing a structural inspection for a renovation I'm funding to fix their HVAC system. I tried to tell you. Vance looked at Marcus, the vagrant in the dusty boots, the squatter with the blueprints. But the manager, Vance whispered. The manager, Marcus said, is a tenant who just evicted himself. And you, officer, are a public servant who just arrested a property owner for standing in his own building. Miller walked over to Vance. He reached out his hand. Badge, gun, now. Sarge, I didn't know. You didn't verify, Miller barked. You profiled. You assumed. You escalated. You arrested a man for sitting while black in a building he owns. Give me your badge. Vance's hands shook as he unpinned the shield from his chest. The metal felt heavier than it ever had before. He placed it in Miller's hand. Marcus rubbed his wrist, wincing. Jim, I want my lawyer, and I want pictures taken of these wrists. We're going to do this by the book. Absolutely, Mr. Thorne, Miller said. We'll get the medic. I am so sorry. Don't apologize to me, Marcus said, looking at the terrified rookie. Save it for the city treasurer. The fallout was swift, brutal, and public. The video from the coffee shop hit the internet before Marcus had even left the precinct. It was titled, Cop Arrests Owner of Building for Trespassing. It had 4 million views by dinner time. The optics were indefensible. A young white officer manhandling an older black man who was calmly sitting with blueprints. The dialogue was damning. I don't care about your business. I don't care if you're the Pope. Brett Higgins, the manager, was fired the next morning. The ownership group of the Iron Press franchise issued a desperate apology claiming Brett's actions did not reflect their values. It didn't matter. Marcus Thorne, exercising a clause in the commercial lease regarding criminal activity and harassment on premises, evicted the coffee shop 3 weeks later. The space sat empty for a month before Marcus leased it to a local community youth center rent-free. Officer Kyle Vance was placed on administrative leave, but the investigation was short. The sheer incompetence, the failure to investigate, and the clear racial bias evident in his assumptions made him a liability the department couldn't keep. He was terminated within the month. His name became shorthand in the academy for what not to do. At 23, his law enforcement career was over, but the real blow came in civil court. Marcus Thorne sued the city not for the money but for the principle. The lawsuit alleged false arrest, excessive force, and civil rights violations. The city attorneys took one look at the deposition, the video evidence, and the fact that the victim was one of the most respected developers in the state, and they folded. They settled for $6.2 million, a record for the department. Marcus didn't keep a dime. He established the Thorne Legal Defense Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to providing top-tier legal representation for indigent defendants who had been wrongfully arrested. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a bad arrest. It was a story about perception. It was about the dangerous arrogance of assuming that you can judge a man's worth by his boots. It was about a system that is too quick to criminalize presence. Marcus Thorne still visits his buildings. He still wears his Carhartt jacket and his dusty boots. But now, when he sits in a coffee shop in the Depot District, the officers who walk the beat wave at him. They know who he is. But the tragedy is, they should have treated him with that respect, even if he owned nothing but the shirt on his back. Dignity shouldn't have a price tag, and rights shouldn't require a property deed. What do you think? Should rookie officers be required to undergo more rigorous training on bias before hitting the streets? And do you think the manager deserved to lose his job for making that call? Let me know in the comments below. As always, stay safe, stay kind, and watch out for one another. Until next time.